Hey, this is Nolan North, and you're listening to Medium Shift. Everything you want to know about any adaptation is here. Medium Shift. It's where I go. It's what I listen to. So you should too.
Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
This episode, we enter the Animus in Assassin's Creed.
Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And as you mentioned, this episode we're going to be looking at the recent video game adaptation of the popular video game franchise, Assassin's Creed. Directed by Justin Kurzel, starring Michael Fassbender, released in 2016 off the top of my head. What did you think of this film?
I thought it was there.
It was a movie?
It was definitely a movie.
Very descriptive.
Well, no, I was going in there with low expectations, and it did exceed my expectations, but not enough to make it like a great movie. It's a serviceable action film, is how I'll put it.
Yep.
Like, there was clearly some love that went into it. It was not just like a hungry cash grab for the franchise, and like the work of Michael Fassbender was pretty intense, even if some of what he was working with wasn't all that great.
Yeah, sure.
We should also probably signify first up how much of fans we are of the franchise as a whole.
Just so people know where we're coming from.
Our biases. Despite being very much part of the video game culture, I never actually played the Assassin's Creed games up until recently.
Travesty.
Yeah, so I actually came in with, like, I had a nice general knowledge, thanks to cultural osmosis, but never actually had got my hands on until I set up this game. And I played, like, the first game in lead up to this, then watched the film, and then went back to the games.
Okay.
And I'm glad I went back to the games.
It's a much nicer place to end in,
yes.
Yeah, sure. No, fair enough. In contrast, I am a big fan of the Assassin's Creed games. I've played almost every single mainline Assassin's Creed game and has dabbled in a little bit of their stuff. Like, AC has become a huge franchise now. Like, there's so many books. Obviously, there's this film. There's a bunch of short films based on it as well. There's so many other spin-off video games and things like that. So it's impossible to, like, cover absolutely everything, which we won't even try to do in this podcast. But ever since Assassin's Creed 2, I picked up as, like, the first adult game, shall we say, that I played, the first, like, violent, gory game. I've just been in love with the franchise ever since, because so much about stealth action open world appeals to me, and I've played almost every single game besides Unity. That was the only one that I skipped, almost, incrementally as they come out. So yeah, so moving into the film with obviously a lot of prior knowledge, I'm going to have a set amount of expectations. To be honest though, I didn't watch this film when it came out because I heard it was garbage, and frankly I thought it looked garbage. So going into this podcast, I also had so many preconceived notions of people did not like this movie, and I was kind of the same as you in that it exceeded my expectations, but since my expectations were so low, that still doesn't really mean much. I don't think the movie is particularly good. I think it's quite flat and dull for a lot of it. I think I really like the director. Justin Kurzel has done some great stuff before. Like, Macbeth and Snowtown are both fantastic films. And you can really sort of see, like, an artistic style and vision and, like, mood kind of coming through. Like, Macbeth especially has such an amazing tone and sense of style and incredible cinematography, and there are flashes of it in this, but just not enough for it to actually be an interesting and entertaining film, which I was ultimately disappointed by, but I was even just glad to see those flashes of artistic integrity in there at all.
So the film, just for a quick rundown of it, just in case you need a little help remembering, it is basically the story of Callum What's his face?
Callum Lynch.
Callum Lynch,
Yep.
which, yeah, that is on the nose, if anything.
Yeah.
basically being framed, possibly, or he did commit murder, not sure, and being sent to the death penalty. But then, psych, not death penalty. He's been taken to this big Abstergo. Made up names are hard to pronounce.
No, that's fair, especially if you haven't heard them spoken before.
Yes.
Yeah, he gets taken to a large Abstergo conglomerate based in Madrid, Spain.
Yep, they use freaky science magic to look into his genetic memory in the biggest quotations I can give. To just look, now he's his ancestor, and his ancestor is an assassin and kicking a lot of ass.
Yep.
And then, surprise, the guys who are keeping him there are the natural enemy to an assassin, which is a Templar. And then they try and find an apple.
And
The end.
Yep. You sound so invested in that plot, honestly.
I'm just trying to get through as quickly as possible.
Truly rapturous. Yep.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. I mean, the general outline of the structure of this film is going to be familiar to any fans of the Assassin's franchise. Like, for people who are not familiar with the franchise, the general conceit of it is basically that it is largely historical fiction, looking at the endless war between two factions, the Assassins and the Templars, throughout history, basically trying to represent order and chaos, where the Templars basically want complete control, want to subjugate the population, and so on and so forth, where the Assassins are the ultimate sort of vanguards of freedom in many ways. The larger connective tissue of the universe, there is surprisingly a significant amount of lore in the Assassin's Creed universe, derives from what is called like the pre-civilization, which is the civilization before us, called the Isus, who are like a group of advanced, very tall and highly intelligent beings who created humanity as basically a slave force for them. And then we worship the Isus as gods. But then after a little while, the Isus and the humans interbred and led to a new Isu-human hybrid who were the original Adam and Eve, hence references to the Bible, who sort of started a rebellion against the Isus, who were eventually killed off during a giant solar flare. It's a whole other thing. And then all of their technology and information has just kind of been scattered across history. So many of the games and sort of the historical locations are centered around seeking ISU technology. Like in this film, obviously there's the piece of Eden, but there's a lot of pieces of Eden and apples all throughout all the different games that kind of exists as like a larger mythological connective tissue, not only throughout history, but between the games themselves. So, yeah. And even the whole idea of like it being set in modern day and then taking place back in historical times is from the games as well. So
because the first like 4 games, isn't it? We follow the character of Desmond Miles.
For 3. Well, it depends what you count as a mainline game, because theoretically it's Assassin's Creed 1, 2, Revelations, Brotherhood, Revelations, then Assassin's Creed 3. Yep. AC4 he doesn't shook, he's dead by Assassin's Creed 4.
Yeah, spoilers.
Spoilers, well.
But yes. But so he's sort of the closest thing you get to a main character throughout this thing. And he's voiced, like most main characters, by a friend of the show, Nolan North.
Are we just going to cut it in now, or...?
I was assuming it would be at the start of the thing, given that he's introduced.
Oh, okay, sure. All right. Yeah, all right. We will not acknowledge it then. All right, cool. Yeah. So the original, we can kind of say trilogy, but like Brotherhood and Revelations fit into this story arc as well. Like this is kind of the difficult thing when it comes to transmedia franchises in cataloging how it's being constructed. So it started with the original game, who followed Altair during the
Crusades.
The Crusades, yes. Yeah, basically. Which was followed up by Assassin's Creed 2, which followed Ezio Auditore da Firenze in Renaissance Italy, who ended up being the most popular character of the franchise. And Assassin's Creed 2 was really the game that sort of set off the franchise in many respects. That was a huge hit when it came out, and it led to 2 not necessarily spin-off games but continuation games with Ezio in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Assassin's Creed Revelations, both those games which actually quite like myself, and then Assassin's Creed 3, which ends Desmond's original trilogy by him dying to stop the solar flare, which is what originally destroyed the Isus in the first place, from destroying all of humanity again. That's the general gist of it. It gets into a lot of different recurring characters and lore and things like that, which we don't really need to touch on, obviously.
And then the series continues for so many more mainline games after that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
To the point where it just forgets what numbers are.
Well, honestly, I think that's an intentional choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so people don't go into a game thinking, do I have to play the previous 9 games to understand what's going on in this?
And let's be honest, it got sketchy with the numbers as soon as they introduced the spin-offs.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, it's the exact next point of that game, but it's not part of the mainline series.
Yeah, it's semantics in many respects. One of them,
And look, video games in general just seem to struggle with numbers.
yeah, I mean, look at Valve. Ooh, they can't even count to 3. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really makes Assassin's Creed great as a franchise ultimately is that it is, while it has like an overarching mythology and world and things like that, which is fine. I've never been incredibly invested in like the contemporary setting and the stuff with the ISIS and things like that. I've always been more invested in kind of what the episodic structure of it is, in that each game follows like generally a new protagonist in a new setting in a new open world who are on their own arc, which ties into the larger Assassin's Creed versus Templars fight, but is ultimately something unto itself. And this film kind of takes that approach as well, though compared to the games, it leans much more heavily on the modern day stuff compared to the video games. In the video games, the contemporary stuff is basically just framing. So like, the game will start and every now and then it'll cut back to what's going on in modern day, but the main focus of the game is always in the historical setting. Whereas in this film, it's basically reversed because they want to, I guess, front that larger mythology and plot, because obviously they wanted this to start a franchise and connect in whatever else. So yeah. Do you for someone who isn't quite as familiar with the mythology and lore, is there anything that particularly stood out to you regarding this film? Or
Well, not me specifically, but there was a little thing that I noticed, because I've at least got some knowledge prior to watching the movie about what the Assassin's Creed series is about.
Okay.
And I know the general sort of main plot points. But like a friend who also went and watched the movie close to when it came out and who didn't know anything about the Assassin's Creed series as franchise was kind of lost, which I find interesting. And watching it now, I'm like, I can see why. Like one of the questions was, what the hell was the Animus? They don't actually really explain it a whole lot in the film.
yeah, that's kind of a good point.
I feel there's a whole, if you don't have at least some little level knowledge of the Assassin's Creed franchise, things are going to get lost. I don't know if it's probably not a great thing for a movie, but at the same time, if they fill in all that stuff for the non-players, it's just going to lose the people who are invested in the franchise.
Sure.
And that leads to the interesting point of the fact that this isn't based on any of the games as an adaptation straight, but in fact, technically just part of that universe, just on a different medium.
Yeah, just an original story, as you say, a different medium.
So my whole thought process looking into this is, where is this fitting in? How much am I going to have to be invested in the rest of the world to understand both this film and how it sits in regards to everything else?
Yeah, sure. I think you make a really good point. And I do think this movie's approach to exposition is very strange in a lot of ways. Like, not only does it start with scrolling text that is supposed to, like, introduce you to the Assassins versus Templars idea, but they even have a character in Callum Lynch who doesn't know anything about this world, who is basically a newcomer in the same way that Desmond was in the original games. And yet they don't just go through the classical exposition route of, like, largely explaining everything to them. Because not only would that be, like, logical and organic to the story, because it's literally him being introduced to this world that, hey, he has been connected to but has no prior knowledge with, like, similar to the to an audience who wouldn't be familiar with it, but they completely forego all of that to instead have this kind of weird mishmash of details and characters from the games that doesn't really cohere into anything. And honestly, I'm kind of not surprised to know that someone who isn't familiar with this franchise was just kind of lost watching it. Like, ultimately, you say it is an original story. Like, Callum is an original character. His ancestor is an original character. The head of Abstergo has shown up in previous games before. He was in the original Assassin's Creed game, and he's been mentioned in a bunch since then, considering he is the head of Abstergo, who are basically the modern-day version of the Templars. As well as one of the other assassins in the facility showed up in one of the spin-off games, Assassin's Creed Liberation, which I haven't actually played. So there are definitely those connective tissues there, but there's
a
not
scene where it's just full of all the weapons. So, like, very fan servicey.
Yeah, 100%. But it's not... I it's just such a weird, unhelpful approach, I think, in a lot of ways, that this doesn't work particularly well as an introduction to the franchise, and yet it doesn't add anything particularly new to people already familiar to the franchise. Like, watching this film, I knew every single beat immediately. Like, you know, he's just going to be inducted into Abstergo, he's not going to be really sure where his loyalties lie, he's going to start experiencing the assassins through his memories, he's going to learn all those skills through the bleeding effect, which is a big part of the first 3 games, and eventually he's going to turn on the Abstergo members, kill a Templar, and then decides to be an assassin at the end of the film. It follows that beat by beat, which is an incredibly straightforward story arc from the game and doesn't add anything interesting to it. So it's kind of a weird result of like a transmedia product in that it doesn't satisfy newcomers to the franchise, and it doesn't satisfy people already familiar with the franchise, which basically means this is a film for no one.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's an interesting point in the fact that Ubisoft was basically there from the beginning. I think they were the ones that were wanting this movie. They were the ones that got in contact. They were the ones that said we wanted Michael Fassbender to play our character.
Oh, for sure. They've been pushing for this to be like a big transmedia franchise for a long time.
And I really can't tell whether that helps or hinders this in any way, because I can see a lot of problems that this would face, but in terms of trying to develop that story, like you mentioned, it sort of plays for no one. But without them, we wouldn't have had some of the highlights of this movie, which is the visual sort of aspect of it, which I think is probably the best part of the movie, is the fact that it looks fantastic and the costumes are so real and so like heavily inspired by the games, and they were helped with by Ubisoft. All the weapons were all, of course, from Ubisoft designs. The way all the action was choreographed and all very real, which was an interesting point to bring up. Not a whole lot of CGI.
Yeah.
Which I'm really thankful for.
Yeah, I was looking that up. It wasn't like 80% of stunts were done in camera or something like that, which was great. But I will admit, I don't think a lot of that kind of came through. Like, while watching it, it's an interesting point you make regarding the visual style, because the historical authenticity and the look of the original, like the Spanish sequences are fantastic. Yeah. I don't know how historically accurate they are, but they are incredibly faithful to the visual design of the games, which I think is great. And as I mentioned before, like, Justin Kurzel is a great visual director. He's worked with the same cinematographer, who I will shout out because cinematographers don't get the recognition they deserve.
Absolutely.
Adam Akapour, who was the cinematographer on this film as well. And for the most part, it largely looks great. And I think there's glimpses of that visual style. But I also think it's an interesting point you bring up regarding Ubisoft's sort of inclusion in this, because while they sort of led that credence and authenticity to the look of the film, I think they might have hamstrung it plot-wise.
Yeah.
I think they might have kind of pushed for the fact that they wanted it to be so heavily based in the modern-day setting, based around the Pieces of Eden and Abstergo and things like that. And ultimately, a lot of that is what drags it down. Like, hands down, the best stuff in this film all happens in Spain.
Oh, absolutely.
In the 1400s Spain, like the actual animus sequences, anything that happens in like the really flat, boring, like drab Abstergo, what would you call it, like building, whatever else, just isn't...
Set piece.
Yeah, set piece. Yeah, it just isn't very interesting. And I really think that's probably what Ubisoft's biggest contribution would have been to this, because they wanted it to be slavish to the story of the games. So, yeah. I don't know. I feel like this would have done a little bit better if it was almost a more hands-off approach, that they let Justin Kurzel, and Michael Fassbender was largely involved with the story and script in this to a significant level. Like, he's a producer on this film, which I was quite surprised by.
And he was there in the editing as well, so he had his hands through the entire production process.
100%, which really surprised me, because honestly, I would not have expected that watching the final product. And I kind of think that if Ubisoft sort of stepped back and let Michael Fassbender and Justin Kurzel sort of do their own thing in this universe without being slavish to the tropes of the original stories, I think it just would have been more interesting. Yeah.
From what I heard, it was actually Fassbender who brought on Kurzel.
Oh, yeah.
Because they worked together in Macbeth.
Macbeth, yeah. Same with Marion Cotillard as well. They were the two stars of Macbeth. So, yeah. Oh, which, I mean, obviously, it just kind of speaks to the fact that he clearly wanted to do something visually inventive and such to bring him on. So, yeah, unfortunately, the final product just didn't lend itself to all that creative interest, which is disappointing.
It's unfortunate. So do you want to talk about some of the similarities to the original franchise as a whole?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've already sort of touched on how this film kind of mirrors a lot of the familiar beats when it comes to the Assassins versus Templars story and things like that.
And it all very looks quite similar in terms of costuming and prop design.
100%. Even in regards to like the movement and everything as well, like the way that the parkour across rooftops and things like that, and the leap of faith and everything, all of that is very slavish to the game.
Yes.
Yeah, one of
Including the so many instances of the eagle.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to bring that one up. Like, the eagle has always been a really key visual motif for the franchise, and that he's kind of the emblem of the Assassin's Creed and Order. And I thought it was kind of a nice and entertaining visual touch to have that eagle almost be the one symbol that connects all of these disparate realms. Like, you see the eagle way back in Spain, you see it when Callum's mother is killed, and then it transitions to modern day, and then you see it in front of the Abstergo facility.
And then later in the climax in London.
Yeah, exactly. I think that sort of reoccurring visual motif was not only reminiscent of the games, but actually kind of made sense in a way that I thought was pretty
And there was
good.
a great shot that I remember where it's sort of panning over the ancient Spain and looks over and just does this full 360, and it was like basically taken straight from the games whenever you get to a certain vantage point.
Yeah.
And just seeing that with like a sort of more live action type scenario just looked fantastic.
It was really cool. It looks like a viewpoint synchronization. Yeah, so in the games, for people who aren't familiar, there are basically points of the map where you can go up and sort of synchronize to fill in your map. So it's basically you get up to one point and then the camera pans around with the eagle and does like a full 360 of the area before coming back down to you. And yeah, that was a great point. That was a really nice visual motif that they embedded in the film in a way that I thought was actually pretty interesting. So yeah, no, it was cool.
That's what you need in a sort of video game adaptation, is you need to look at the visual style most of all, because you're never going to be able to emulate the gameplay.
Well, no, because obviously it's a film.
Yeah, it's a different medium. You're looking at an action versus a passive sort of audience, in a sense. Not fully going into the full, like, Marshall McLuhan, hot and cold media and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
But more in the fact that you literally control the actions in a video game, and in a movie, it's already been done for you. And so you're there along for the ride rather than just sort of in full control.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those difficult things. Obviously, we've talked about this before regarding video game adaptations, but in transitioning from a video game to film, you were taking things away from the audience. Like, you were taking away that autonomy and that direct engagement with the medium itself. So, which ultimately is why I think a lot of video game adaptations fail, is because that it's not a comfortable transition in many respects. And I think really, if there are video game franchises that are going to succeed being adapted into films, it's the ones that are largely narrative driven. I think Assassin's Creed is one of those that, in the right hands with a better script, it could have been actually quite good, but it just didn't quite happen in this respect. Yeah,
but you can see them taking some of the right steps in order to do that, in terms of like picking up on the things that aren't reliant on a player character, in the things like, the synchronization shot, the eagle, all the little references and things that they sort of throw in, and some of the stuff they do. I'd actually like to get your opinion as a huge Assassin's Creed fan.
Yes, as I stare at the poster on my wall.
Yes, on the new designed Animus.
Yeah, well, I quite liked it, to be honest. This is one of those things, sort of continuing on from the idea of adapting from video game to film. In the video game, obviously, you only see the Animus in the modern day setting, and the moment he goes into the Animus, you're just running around in historical setting. But the idea of like sort of consistently visually transitioning between the modern day in the Animus and 1940s Spain, I thought was not only a really good idea, but was really well embodied in this new version of the Animus that was so more visually driven. So basically in the original games, and you even see that original version of the Animus in that room, just sort of in the background, it's literally just kind of a chair or a couch that you lie on, and then you just nap for a little bit while you go and experience your memories. But the idea of turning it into something that is dynamic and moves and sort of mirrors the actions of what your ancestor is doing, I thought was actually a really cool and smart idea. That was one of the right ways to visually adapt from the video game, because that's something that you can't, you obviously, especially when you're controlling the action, you obviously can't be constantly transitioning between modern day and your memories in that way. But in the film, you have that freedom to do that, and I just thought it was a really great way of that was just a really smart design choice, I thought. Yeah, which I thought was cool. So yeah, as I said, I think those sequences are the best in the film, the Animus sequences.
I do agree, and it really helps narratively as well in the whole idea of him, like that sort of idea of the bleeding.
The bleeding effect. Yes.
And it's a really nice shorthand for like he's actually learning all the stuff because he's physically doing it rather than the game. It's more sort of bit more long term sort of. You can't really do that because you're looking at a 2-hour movie. You can't do what they do across multiple 40+ hour video games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I did have a few little gripes with it, I will admit. Just the fact that it kept making the same sort of metallic sound whenever it moved, and I felt like they kept cutting back a bit too much.
Sure.
The back.
It might have been overplayed a little bit.
But yeah. But those aside, I do think it was a good choice. I think it would have been best if they sort of maybe try and met the middle ground in the sense that he was sort of moving, but maybe just less of the metallic stuff, and maybe get a bit more sci-fi and have a bit more sort of just almost like Kinect style VR.
Yeah, sure. No, fair enough. No, I think I can see where you're coming from.
Really smart idea, like as a good way of like changing to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. A smart way of adapting from...
That's a word now.
Adaptating from the source material. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I'm trying to think because you make a really interesting point regarding the use of VR in that as well, because there is almost like a weird meta narrative in the video games, in that it's kind of a game within a game in some respect. Especially in the first 3 games, you're controlling Desmond, and Desmond is technically the character you're playing as. But then in Desmond goes into the Animus, which is basically just a video game software, and then you go back and then play through your ancestors as a kind of video game. And even like later games like Assassin's Creed 4 and Assassin's Creed Liberation have literalized that in the narrative in the way by having the character you play literally be a game designer working for Abstergo and trying to go back through all these past memories, which I think is really funny. And that idea of like visualizing it in VR, as you mentioned, I think is kind of cool. And a really good analogy to the bleeding effect as well, because it visually enforces the idea of like blurring between reality and fiction in so many respects, which I think is kind of cool. Yeah, I didn't think about that while watching the film, but it does kind of push forward that narrative home in a way that I didn't think about, which is kind of cool.
The only reason I sort of thought of that, just to be honest, because there's a great sequence that I love where he's just after a big sort of fight and they steal the apple back in ancient Spain, and he drops through and runs through the tunnel and does an awesome jump across the bridge.
I remember.
It sort of cuts between him and real life. And part of me was thinking, wow, that's really cool, and I love the way they jumped it. But at the same time, like, oh, it's sort of taken me out of the story now, because I like was following this character. It was all very flowing well, and then suddenly, oh, we're back in modern, and we're back again with Spain. So I think it was like trying to strike that balance, I think. Needs to be very key to that.
As you mentioned, I think it's a little bit overplayed, even if the idea itself was quite sound.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's quite interesting. Are there any sort of like characters or anything you want to talk about? So like Callum is an original character. Jeremy Irons' character, as I said, has shown up in Assassin's Creed 1 and referenced in a bunch of the other games. He looks completely different in the original game. Big surprise, he's like fat and bald and whatever else. But yeah, I mean, if you get Jeremy Irons, you can get Jeremy Irons. So Marion Cotillard as well was initially introduced, I think, in one of the novels.
Okay.
And then showed up in this game, showed up in this film, as well as some of the other assassins, like kind of being referenced and such. There's kind of a nice visual nod, which sort of goes back to the fan servicey thing. In the third act, when all the assassins start rebelling, some of the assassins grab some of the items from the room and then start using them, and it kind of suggests that they're ancestors to characters we know from the original games. So one of them suggests like he's from Assassin's Creed Black Flag, one of them comes from Assassin's Creed Liberation, and another one is from I don't quite remember.
The one set in China.
Oh yeah, Assassin's Creed Chronicles.
Chronicles. That's
China. Yeah, that's right. That's the side-scrolling sort of. There's a spin-off trilogy. Is it China, Japan, and India? I think. I don't quite remember, but yeah. But I just thought that was kind of like a neat visual motif, and it's a way that looking at someone using those weapons isn't going to be particularly confusing to a viewer who isn't familiar with that, but to fans, it has a little bit extra significance. So it's weird. The more we talk about this movie, the more I'm kind of disappointed about what it could be, because I think there's a bit of an artistic style in there. I think there are some smart adapting choices. But ultimately, I think the final product is just a little bit flat and dull, to be honest, which is just, I think, is largely a script problem. If you fixed the script, but if you kept the same creative team and the similar visual style, maybe tone down on the stylization a little bit, because I do think it gets a little bit shaky cam and messy at times, we could have had a legitimately compelling and unique take on the Assassin's Creed IP. But sadly, was not the case. And this movie did not do well when it came out and was crushed by critics, which is all pretty unfortunate in hindsight, to be honest, because I do think this could have been something so much more interesting. Yeah.
Clearly, they should have done it differently.
Very good, very good.
Is that a segue?
Yeah, it's a segue. No, 100%. I think I was leaning to that anyway. Yeah, good stuff. All right.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Jingle. Yeah, all right. Awesome.
All right, cool. So yeah, how would you mentioned that you'd change the script, obviously. Is there anything in particular?
Well, I mean, funnily enough, there's a couple of different ways that I would want to do this differently. One of them is, as you mentioned, kind of redo the script. But ultimately, when they initially announced that they were doing Assassin's Creed movie, what I kind of wanted them to do is to just keep it purely in the historical setting. So in so many of the games, as much as I enjoy the games, the mainline like contemporary stuff with Desmond and all that has never been the most interesting thing to me. I've always found the historical settings and the exploration of those time periods the most fascinating stuff, and I really think this film would have been so much more interesting and just exciting if it was purely historical fiction. So you can still keep it in like ancient Spain, you can still keep it with the main character and all that, but just not worry about Callum, not worry about anything contemporary day, and just focus on his narrative during that time period. I think not only would that have been great, because obviously, as you mentioned, like, it's visually striking. It's incredibly faithful to how the games look and everything like that. And it leans into so much of the stylistic and artistic strengths of the film. So basically making those sequences the entire movie, I really think would be the right way to go. And you can even, like, you can bring in the modern day stuff as like an end credit scene or something, because obviously you want to continue the franchise. As basically once he hides the piece of Eden somewhere, and then the end credit scene is Callum waking up and saying, okay, I know where the piece of Eden is. Cut to black, deal with that in the franchise and things like that. But I think, like the games, I think keeping it stuck in the historical setting and the exploration of that time period would make it so much more entertaining. So, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. My sort of look into the do it differently, I sort of ran into a problem I've had in the past before, wherein you sort of, if you balance one thing higher than the other, it sort of throws off everything. It's in a weird sort of state. So I think I completely agree. We need more of the past. They were great scenes, although very lacking in any sort of real story.
Oh, yeah. They're basically set pieces.
Yeah.
That's the action set pieces.
You literally could have taken out the subtitles and I still would have understood the movie.
Yeah, I know.
But I think, in my opinion, you can't fully get rid of the modern day story.
Okay.
I think that's too sort of linked to the Assassin's Creed franchise. And it's really the best way I reckon you can get exposition across. In that sense, is sort of that whole looking back without just slowing down the scenes in the past.
Okay, sure.
Because I feel that's going to be my biggest concern, is if you play too much with the scenes in the past, it's going to lose what made them great, and that's the very visual style, the very frantic, great pacing.
The kineticism of them,
and
obviously.
the full kinetic
movement, which is obviously, a big part of the franchise as well, is that manipulation and that dominance of space. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I would have definitely more of it, but I'd still, any sort of time you need like story breaks and exposition breaks, it would have been taken back in sort of the modern times. Wouldn't have had all the twists with the Templars. That would have made that story a lot more simpler. And just sort of leading on to almost like Callum dealing with, okay, this stuff happens to his family, he doesn't know why, and he's sort of like is learning about what the Assassins and the Templars are. Not by like full twist and not trying to find Eden, he's just sort of being almost inducted into the Assassins order as is.
Sure, okay. So simplifying it a little bit. Yeah.
And still having that same bit at the end where I reckon it was nice showing him being an actual assassin, maybe cut it down a little bit and not go into full sort of that whole deal with the daughter and whether they're doing the right thing and Jeremy Irons and all that.
Sure.
I would have just left that more as just like a action piece like they did in the past, but let's just set it in modern England. And then he's off with a bunch of other assassins to continue the legacy and stuff.
Okay, sure.
So that's sort of where I'd sort of place things at.
So it sounds like largely you would be fixing the script problems and story problems in a lot of respects.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
'Cause
Yeah.
that is the main issue with this film, I feel.
100%, as we've talked about. I think it would be... I think you would still have to be careful, especially regarding the contemporary stuff, because that's the stuff that really drags down the film in many ways, because it is like a drab, flat setting. I don't think any of the actors are particularly interesting. There's almost nothing to the characters as well in many respects as well.
Oh, yeah.
So
I thought that was a nice little callback to the original Assassin's Creed game, where they were all very plastic modeled faces with no expression.
Yes.
And it's good that they captured that essence.
yeah, exactly. It feels really authentic
Yeah.
to the style of the original game. No, 100%. Yeah, so you would have to be careful with that. But if you were rejigging the entire script and keeping the main focus on the historical setting, I think that could still definitely work. Yeah, as we've mentioned plenty of times, there is definitely potential here, and there are still good things in this movie. There's just not enough for it to be, a compelling enough recommendation. Yeah.
Oh, and one last thing to change. Don't use the same eagle shot repeatedly. Keep the eagle,
Okay.
but do something different with it.
Change it up a wee bit.
Change it a little up a bit.
Maybe use different eagles, different
Yes.
species of eagles in each shot.
Or just any shot that isn't the eagle going from screen left to screen right.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Up close in camera while flying.
Maybe you can go right to left instead.
Yeah. Or just, come down to perch.
Ooh, that would be cool. We never actually saw an eagle land in this movie, did we?
No.
It was only flying. That must be a very tired eagle. Oh, poor thing. Yeah. Would you keep Michael Fassbender as well? Because I thought about recasting, but honestly, I think the cast is good. I think just the characters and script let them down.
Yeah, I'd definitely keep Michael Fassbender. Even though Jeremy Irons did kind of phone it in, I'd still sort of keep him. I feel he just needs something else to keep him interested.
Anyway, he needs to have an actual character to work
yeah.
with. Yeah. Exactly.
But also in my version, he's not entirely needed, so I might just not have that character entirely.
Okay.
So that's another thing. But yeah, cast, I'd say keep the same.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Marion Cotillard is still quite good as well. Like,
absolutely.
she's really the only person in the film outside of Callum who has, like, a vaguely interesting arc. Yeah. And that it's interesting because she's, like, the moral ambiguity, the grey area between the Assassins and the Templars, which is something that isn't really touched on too much in the games, and the film tries to make an effort for, but just doesn't really, not much comes out of it at the very least, yeah.
Oh, and definitely got to keep Ariane Labed, who played Maria in the past.
Oh, yes, sure.
She did, I feel, even though...
She was great.
She was great, and didn't have any modern sort of scenes to drag her down.
Yeah, I thought that was disappointing, so,
I would like to see more of her.
Exactly. Oh, this is another thing that I wanted to talk about briefly it's only suddenly occurred to me, but the idea that Marion Cotillard shows up in the past as well?
Oh, yeah, with the little flashing with her in an assassin's...
Yeah, exactly. In an assassin's garb and things like that. So that doesn't have any prerequisite in the games or the wider franchise as far as I can tell.
Nor do they do anything with it in the film.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was weird. I wonder if that might be something that would be worth exploring if you were going to do an entire rewrite or something. Like, have that kind of lean into the fact that she may be working for Abstergo and the Templars now, but she was part of the Assassins back in that, back in that time period, which would be kind of cool. Interesting.
I feel that was kind of more just like a sort of sequel teaser kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in that case, it kind of lets it down.
Yeah, because it felt... I mean, the fact that I was still questioning it after the movie as like a big fan and everything like that, the moment kind of came out of nowhere and they did nothing with it, which I just thought was weird. So, yeah.
Especially because it seemed like all up until then she was going to be like redeemed or... Well, not even like redeemed, but like switch sides and everything. And then Jeremy Irons dies and she's like, yeah, okay, you killed my father, so I'm getting revenge. Fuck you guys.
Cool, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a shame. Awesome. Well, so that was Assassin's Creed then. Shall we move into random talk?
Sure.
Yep.
What have you been watching / reading / writing /
seen it
eating
before.
/ surviving / playing / whatever else you always come up with? I'm trying to do this time.
Yeah, sure.
Anything in.
You made a valiant effort. Good job.
I'll leave it to the master in all future episodes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. No, I was just going to recommend something from Justin Kurzel, the director of this film. Even though this is by far the worst of the movies of his I've seen, I would definitely recommend people check out Snowtown.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you've seen Snowtown, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So Snowtown's in Australia. Sort of?
As in, I watched it, but very much with a blanket sort of to censor.
Yeah, sure.
self-censor.
It's pretty unnerving at times. Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar, Snowtown is an Australian film. It's based on a true story of basically a large amount of murders that were conducted by a group of people in the town of Snowtown. So it's kind of like, if you enjoy true crime, if you enjoy any sort of narratives like that, you'll 100% find this interesting, because it's a really, really fascinating case, and it is brought to life in deeply unsettling while also being scarily accurate ways. And it is a really fantastic film that has a similar kind of mood and visual style to Macbeth and his other movies, while still being an incredibly compelling narrative. Yeah, but yeah, 100% a bit of a warning if you don't like being squeamish, or if you don't like really horrifying murder cases or true crime stuff, probably not for you. But if you love like Serial or Making a Murder and stuff, this is 100% worth seeing. Yeah, great film.
Put me off barrels, but aside from that, pretty good.
Sure.
I've recently sort of picked up someone who we've talked about in a previous episode in Random Talk, but more in a sort of refined sense. I'm looking at it in a bit broader and looking at the company that is Blue Tongue Films.
Oh, sure, okay.
Which is the group sort of created by the Edgerton brothers of Joel and Nash.
Yep.
With a whole bunch of other, basically, Australian and one American friends, sort of coming together to create short films, full-length films, music videos, which I've mainly been focusing on. Because they do some really visually appealing stuff. And I highly recommend looking at all the music videos done by Nash Edgerton.
Okay, cool. Are they on YouTube or?
Yeah, you'll find them everywhere. Or if you go to their website, I have a full list of what all of the groups have done in terms of music videos.
Yeah, awesome.
But Nash Edgerton's work, especially seeing that sort of that blend of him as a director and as a stunt coordinator, they're all very sort of physical in the work, and which works so well with music videos and things. Also, he selects some really good bands and artists. So even if you're just looking for someone to listen to, I'd say follow him, because he's worked with some great artists like Bob Dylan and Ben Lee.
Oh, wow.
Missy Higgins, UMI. There's a whole range of people that he sort of worked with, and I highly recommend going through, even if you're just looking for something new to listen to.
Yeah, fantastic. What films had they done again? I don't quite remember.
Well, there's things like, was it Gringo, Boy Erased, The Gift, which you brought up in a previous episode.
Yes.
The Rover, which is another great little film.
That's right, production company. Sorry, yeah, I'm getting mixed up. Yep, awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, even Animal Kingdom. So yeah, some really good Australian films.
Yeah, I do love Animal Kingdom. Boy Erased is quite good as well. I saw that last year. And obviously I recommended The Gift before. That film is fantastic. Awesome.
So yeah. Oh, also, Brandon Flowers, his music video Crossfires was done by Nash Edgerton, stars Charlize Theron, and is really good.
Oh, cool.
As a music video.
Wait, Charlize Theron's in a music video? How does that work?
It's basically her just kicking ninja ass to save Brandon Flowers.
Cool, yeah.
That is the entire premise of the film, and given that Nash Edgerton is very much a stunt coordinator, it looks physically fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I could see Charlize Theron doing that, to be honest. So I've still been meaning to see Atomic Blonde for a while. I've heard she's fantastic, but haven't got around to it yet.
So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Yeah.
The music video tab on the Blue Tongue Films website.
Fantastic. That's probably the most unique recommendation we've had at the very least. Keep them coming.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in recommendations, love, hate, whatever else. Tell your friends, rate us on iTunes, do all the good things. Next episode, we're going to be doing, I'm quite excited for this one actually, we're going to be doing our first based on true events story regarding, funnily enough, an eagle. I didn't think about that connection actually. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's not actually an eagle. He's Eddie the Eagle.
Yeah, I know, but it's still appropriate. I never thought about that. That's kind of it's a cute continuation between these two films. Yeah. Oh, until next time, fare thee well.
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Fuck up a Templar. Bye.